terms of this religious worldview, I think one of the other things that's so appealing about it is human beings crave doomsday scenarios. The idea that we're living in some kind of unique moment in human history when the world's about to be destroyed. Whether that's true or not, by the way, is incredibly appealing. That is something that gives your life meaning and purpose, even if your life has no meaning and purpose. And the thing with this woke ideology is that, and this is something I kind of started to notice, my journey into this discussion in general was through comedy. I was a stand-up comedian. And in 2015, 2016 in particular, I started to look around and I just saw a lot of people who seemed for some reason to suddenly hate themselves. Like it was so suddenly normal as a comedian, you spend most of your time backstage listening to other comedians. And out of the blue, you'd start getting these kids in their 20s going on stage and going, well, I'm a white guy, therefore blah, blah, blah. And then they do a bunch of self-deprecating jokes, the premise of which was because they were white, they were evil. And this ideology, I think, is fundamentally about self-hate. And if you hate yourself, well, why wouldn't you crave the punishment that you therefore deserve, right? And I think the doomsday narrative maps so well onto wokeness for that reason as well.
We need a place, symbolically speaking, we need a place to put hell and we need a place to put the apocalypse. And the reason we need a place to put the apocalypse is because the human vision is apocalyptic. And the reason for that is that we all die, right? Everything comes to a cataclysmic halt for everyone. And it could happen at any moment. And it could not only happen to you, it could happen to you and everyone you love, and it could happen to your whole society. And that sort of thing has happened, and it definitely always threatens. And so one of our existential problems is that we always have to face the apocalypse. And the way that's been handled in the symbolic landscape of Christianity is that the apocalypse is a distant occurrence in a heavenly place. Now it's ambivalent, right? But it's turned into a psychological reality or a spiritual reality, an ever-present spiritual reality, instead of being necessarily played out in the here and now. But then there's a place for it, and that's appropriate because there should be a place for it. And we're also tilted as information processes very hard to the overweighting of negative information. And the reason for that, I would say, is, well, you can only be so happy, but you can be really, really in pain and then dead. And so you're more sensitive to a unit of threat than you are motivated by a unit of pleasure. And that's well documented. And so then we also have to contend with the fact that we're tilted towards hyper-processing negative information. And then on the privilege front, this is a really complicated one. I think that some of the guilt that the woke types are capitalizing on and also genuinely experiencing is a consequence of the felt need for some true atonement. So you talked about Western privilege. And so, if you live in the West, you're in the top 1% by global and historical standards. So you are privileged. And then you have to contend with the fact that, well, you didn't really earn that, not to some degree, because your pathway forward is going to be proportionate in its success to your work. But, you're born and there are highways and there are automobiles and there's an electrical grid and you have this wealth that's offered to you. And then you might say, well, that's unearned privilege, and to some degree it is. And then the question emerges, well, what should you do about that? And one answer is to flagellate yourself and to feel guilty because there are people out there who weren't arbitrarily rewarded to the same degree you were, and that is an existential problem. And the other solution is to do whatever you can to earn the gifts you've been given, the talents you've been provided with, right? And to say, well, my goal is to justify by my actions the privileges and opportunities I have been granted, and then to work hard to extend those to the degree that's possible to the people around me and to others. And I would say that's genuine atonement. And I think everyone has to do that. And so, if you're not living a life that's as moral as you are privileged, you're going to lay yourself open on the guilt front, and then the woke ideologues are going to tear a strip off you. And certainly these kids that you've observed flagellating themselves for their privilege, they don't know how to atone for the fact that there is an unequal distribution of talents, and that seems to be built into the cosmic structure.
Well, that's why I felt it was so important that someone told them that. And everything you said, particularly about how to respond to privilege, it resonates with me so much, because I've been, my family's been destitute. My family's been very wealthy. I've been the son of a very rich family. I've also been someone who slept on the street for weeks. Like I've seen both of those. And what I learned from all of those experiences is that, like you said, you have to make the most of it and then extend that opportunity to other people. And that's the only way of dealing with it. And there's no other way if you want to be constructive. But let's come back to your point about a positive vision for the future and why conservatives will struggle with it. I think one of the reasons is that inevitably young people do need to rebel against something, and conservative instinctively want to suppress all rebellion because they want to avoid change. And that's why, as someone who's I call myself politically non-binary, that's why I'm excited about talking about this political vision and positive, not political, a positive vision of the future, because I think that's what's needed. And I don't think the anti-woke position, which a lot of us have had to engage in for some time, is going to be the answer, because you have to have something that people buy into, and it can't be normative in the way that conservatives often want it to be. You must do this. That's not going to work with young people. They don't want that. What they want is something that allows them to channel their rebellion into something heroic and productive, as you said, which is why I think showing young people the way out of wokeness through what I talked about in the speech and what you and I just talked about, which is work hard, build and create. That is going to be the way. And I think you probably know my friend Melissa Chen. She tweeted something about this years ago that I thought it was so spot on. She said, you cannot remain woke if you build anything, whether that's a business, whether that's muscle, whether that's a family. And that's why I challenge these kids at the Oxford Union and the audience who were watching, of course, to build and create things. Because the moment you start, you suddenly find out that, hey, just whining about stuff doesn't work. And when you get down to the business of doing things, turns out there's a reason that things are the way they are. There's a reason things don't work quite the way you'd like them to, because reality suddenly comes into conflict with ideology. And so that's why I think it's so important to give kids and young people a path to doing things, because it's only when you're doing things that you start to realize the limitations. And I'm a huge fan of Thomas Sowell, and this is one of his things that he always says, that there are no solutions, only trade-offs. And you only learn this as a young person by